Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the NRG series here in Chicago, Illinois. I am your host, Mr. Clark, my co-host, Devin O'Donnell, better known as Doomwake here, and we are here for round number 2 of our Pioneer Showdown. We're going to crown someone into our invitation at the end of the year, along with our leaderboard and yearly and seasonal leaderboard spots as well. Let's check that out real quick before we head on down to our feature match area, and let's talk about the player we're actually going to watch today, Devin.
Yeah, so Zoe is going to be our main feature match. She is, this is the season 2 leaderboard. She's a little bit down on the leaderboard here, but Fletcher 85 points, Cliff 68, Zoe 61. I don't know if we have, do we have an updated overall leaderboard we can take a look at? Because that's the one we wanted to showcase. Yeah, here we go. So if you look at this is updated with the results from yesterday. So Garrick in first at 138, Connor at 131, Zoe at 104. The winner of this event gets 30 points. That means, was 30 plus 104, quick math, 134. She can't quite catch Garrick for, end of year, but she definitely can get one of those at large bids. So, Zoe definitely in the running for that for sure.
Yep, and remember, for the yearly, which is the one you see on your screen right now, it's top 3. So if everything ended right now, Zoe would make it. Of note, Ryan Bellamy is not playing today. He played yesterday, but not today. He had other stuff to do today. So that's good news for Zoe at large. So she needs to dodge Tim Hatch and Fletcher Johnson. But Fletcher might get the seasonal invite, is what it's looking like as well, right? If he does jump Zoe. So Zoe might just be a lock in that regard. So Zoe wants Fletcher or herself to do really well, but she does need to sweat. Andrew Ellenbogen, Pro Tour champion, did amazing yesterday and is only 1 point behind her on the seasonal leaderboard. But we have Zoe in our feature match area right now, so let's cut on down to it as she is going to be playing Rakdos Aggro, maybe Rakdos Valiant. We'll have to see. Versus Dominic Stryker here on Lotus Field combo. Of note, this is the artist talent version of Lotus Field. If you haven't seen it in a little bit, kind of a new innovation to the deck.
Yeah, we talked about last round with Bloomborough and Duskmorn having a huge impact in the Pioneer format, and both of these players are sporting quite a few Bloomborough and Duskmorn cards. More Bloomborough than the Duskmorn for sure. Zoe's deck is really centered around the Bloomborough Mice package, Hardfire Hero, Emberheart Challenger. It looks like no copies of Manifold Mouse that I can see, because I know that is a card that some of these decks play, so none of those for Zoe, but really centered around Hardfire Hero and Emberheart Challenger. The Valiant creatures are very, very important because, you have a lot of ways to target your creatures. Ancestral Anger. She's playing 4 Infuriate and 4 Monstrous Rage. So a lot of ways to get, stuff going that way. And then for Dominic, you mentioned the artist talent in Dominic's Lotus Field deck. This is kind of a new kid on the block. Maybe you're familiar with sort of I guess I would call it the Tooth and Nail version of Lotus Field.
Oh my God.
Which is trying to, cast like a bunch of ultimatums and bigger spells like that. But Dominic's a little lower to the ground, cantrips and artist talents. And what do we see here happen?
We missed our land drop turn 2. Dominic kept a 1 land or mana confluence sleight of hand, passes the turn on turn 2, discards Pour Over the Pages. Zoe smiled when she saw the mana confluence because she knew that's going to be good for her. Her opponent skipping a turn, very helpful since she didn't have a 2-drop she wanted to play on turn 2. Rather get the Kamano going. We are going to see the Emberheart Challenger come down, get the counter from the other Kamano hitting phase 2, and we're going to see a Monstrous Rage on the flipped Kamano, and Dominic is going to be taking a ton of damage here. I believe 9 damage coming across the board. Dominic going to fall to 8, and we're just going to be going to game 2. I don't think there's anything his deck can do that can stop Zoe just turning sideways and casting any spell prowess-wise.
Yeah, I mean, the Lotus Field deck, the artist talent version is a little bit more powerful in terms of the raw speed, where, previously the deck had to, play Lotus Field on turn 3, maybe turn 2 if you're lucky with a Grazer, and then set up, the next turn, play stage, copy. But this version with talent does have the ability to kill a turn ahead of schedule because, you can go like, talent, activate that with some mana from the Hidden Strings. Once you activate that, your spells cost less. That means you can Hidden Strings for 1 mana and sort of churn through your deck that way. But on 1 land, yeah, there's really no chance that Dominic can get out of this, especially because one of those lands is Mana Confluence. And yeah, this is probably going to be, I would say this is probably the single worst matchup for Dominic to face.
Yeah, and it's a tough spot to be as this is perceived as one of the best decks in Pioneer. But the Lotus Field combo deck does have some real advantages, and we're going to check it out real quick here in the sideboard. So we have some cards that might be helpful. We have 4 Thing in the Ice in the sideboard and 3 Anger of the Gods to start. We have 2 Niv Mizzet Perron, 2 Thought Distortion, a Thassa's Oracle, a 9 Lives, a Leer, and a Dragon Lord Dromoka. Devin, what do you like and why?
So, you mentioned the Thing in the Ice and the Anger of the Gods. Those seem like slam dunks here. Thing in the Ice is not something that I've seen out of these Lotus Field decks before, but it kind of makes sense, especially in this version where you have a lot more cheap cards for Sleight of Hand and for Consider to make sure that you can kind of flip it more reliably early. Anger of the Gods to clean up a bunch of Zoe's creatures. With regards to the 9 lives, I think that's actually going to be staying in the board because of the wishes in Dominic's main deck. So, you'd much rather have that in the sideboard where you have access to 2 copies in the main deck, but maybe also Dominic feels like he doesn't have time to wish for 9 lives, so that could be something else as well.
Oh, did you? I got there for a second.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if it was
I
just
just
muted for
I don't
me,
know
but
exactly what happened. I'm so sorry. Anyways, we
all
have
good.
4 these 3 up next to list, 2 red cap, 2 Eliza's Curse, 1 Hazard, 1 Dragantha, 1 Go for the Throat, 1 Rockface Village. What do you like in the sideboard and why, Devin?
All right. So with regards to Zoe's sideboard, she definitely has the edge in this matchup, so probably doesn't have to change a ton. But wants to get those fatal pushes out of here. Those are basically, sort of dead draws. Although, if Zoe is aware of the presence of Thing in the Ice in Dominic's sideboard, perhaps that is something she wants to keep in, but I'm not sure if she knows that. With
Mhm.
regards to cards she wants to bring in, Thoughtseize for sure. I mean, that's a clean swap, right? 4 push for 4 Thoughtseize. Other than that, I mean, really some of these Lotus Field decks do tend to lean a little bit towards Leer, Disciple of the Drowned. So if that's something that Zoe is expecting, maybe you could go towards the Unlicensed Hearses, but not a ton else besides just swapping the pushes for Thoughtseizes.
Yep. We're going to see how these players want to do it as they are presenting their decks to cut. So let's get up down to the feature match area to see that. And I got to say, I, the Raptors Valiant deck kills me a lot. But I do love that it's in the format. I love that we have like a pump spelly, kind of combat tricky deck that's sick. And I love that Infuriate has landed as the backup spell of choice. Obviously, Monstrous Rage, just incredibly powerful card, right? Part of the reason these decks, you could even consider playing them. Obviously, the Bloomburrow Mice are a big part. But, having that sort of pump spell is good. And then Infuriate just being like, yeah, you know what? The 2 toughness on the back end, that's what matters the most. You could play all these different pump spells to do all these different things, but you just want to outsize things like red removal and opposing creatures. I just think that's so sick to see something like that pop up in this format.
Yeah, it's a little surprising to see Infuriate over Titan Strength because I know that that's one of the cards that the Rakdos Prowess decks kind of leaned a little bit more towards on in the early iterations of this. But it looks like Zoe, today is preferring the extra toughness boost on Infuriate rather than the Scry from Titan Strength. That's kind of like the thing you would consider there. So interesting to see kind of that dynamic.
Yeah, it's huge against decks like Phoenix, right? Fiery
Hmm.
Impulse killing your creature versus not when the Titan Strength is so big. Zoe did not know about Thing in the Ice. Listen, I know Zoe. She's a friend. That face, Zoe just said, oh. She went back, did not see that coming. Now, she does have Hazard in hand. I don't know. So she clearly was thinking about cards like Anger of the Gods, but that wasn't on the radar. And I think if we do see a game 3, Zoe's going to probably bring in at least 1 fatal push to have an out to this if she doesn't have any in already. As Heartfire Hero is a 1-lander and a passing of the turn. Now, Heartfire Hero, pretty good at killing the opponent with Callous Self Sword. And we have it in hand. So if we can draw like another land and some pump spells, this could be game over if Dominic doesn't block.
As we see a second thing in the S here for Dominic. Yeah, Zoe keeping a one lander likely has, you mentioned the Carousel Sword, probably at least one, maybe even two pump spells in hand for Zoe. So you have to imagine if she finds if she finds a land, say it's just Infuriate plus Cell Sword, how much are we looking at? So the mouse is 2, right? The mouse would get +4 from the Infuriate, because that would be +3, and then 1 from the trigger. So that's 4, 5, 6. And then the Cell Sword would be a total of 12, 6 from the trigger and 6 from the burn
Mhm.
together. It looks like
Yep.
Infuriate is going to target the hero. That's going to kill one of those thing in the ices, and that is
Mhm.
a nice way for Zoe to kind of get at least one of those off the battlefield, but still has to answer the second one next turn.
Yep. Notably, it is exiled because of Kamano faces Kakazan's backside, etched of Kamano. Dominic here did have 2 sideboard cards in the hand with these thing in the ices, but as you saw there, sort of had to chump block just because of how much potential damage could come across. And honestly, a little lucky it wasn't something like Monstrous Rage there that started to chip away at the life total.
Yeah, and so now that the hero picked up an extra counter there, so next turn it's an extra +2 damage, right? Because the hero would be
Mhm.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would be 14 damage. So not quite enough to
Third.
get a third thing in the ice.
Okay.
My goodness.
All right, so that's good for Dominic. So now Dominic knows, he can, especially if Zoe's stuck on one land, he can threaten to flip on the following turn. If Zoe finds a land here, which I don't think she did, I think she picked up another Ember Heart. That means she's not going to be able to double pump spell and kill both of these thing in the ices. And Dominic has 4 mana, which is, the exact amount you need to cast 4 spells.
Yeah, well, I don't. I
Does
was
he have
gonna
the right
say, 'cause
spells? Yeah.
with him playing the third thing in the ice, I'm not convinced that he even has the first spell lined up, because maybe would have cast one last turn, and we see that's a sorcery, isn't it? Unless we're post
Well, so
combat, I'm
I
not
think
sure.
she's doing it after combat. I
Okay,
think she
got
said
it.
chump, no effects, and now is like, hey, I'm going to deal 2 damage to this one. That the Ember Heart Challenger got blocked on or whatever.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I couldn't quite tell if we were in post combat. I assume we were.
yeah, yeah. I think that was a spot where it was just some nonverbal where kind of Zoe just moved her hands, like, yeah,
Yep.
I gotta get the 2 damage on here so I can finish it off. Not the greatest spot to be, but Zoe, might still get the board flipped. But if 2 of those are there, Zoe's gonna fall to 3 and just be sort of dead. So now at least if it does unsummon, Zoe can start, playing other Ember Heart challengers like chump block and maybe buy enough time to combo again. As
Yeah, but the real question is, does Dominic have spells? We've been talking about this.
well,
These thing in the aces are really good if you can find the spells to flip it, but Dominic has, drawn too many things and not enough ices.
yeah, I was
He's
gonna say, well, we're
5
starting
mana.
off here with a 5 mana, pour
Okay.
over the pages. So
Okay.
that's gonna help us find some spells. Um, and of note, you can just find stuff like hidden strings, so that counts kind of like a free-ish spell, right? We drew a Lotus Field there, that's pretty big. And we keep talking about how this thing in the ice, is gonna flip, blah, blah, blah. It just being this thing that Zoe's had to like fight through and chump block has been enough, right?
Yeah, just
Yeah. Mhm.
the fact that she has to think about it, that Dominic is still at 18 life, and part of that is just because he drew a lot of these O4s.
Yep. We saw Dominic discard Lotus Field. It's going to play an Artist Talent. That does not trigger Thing in the Ice. It's instant sorceries there. But that does put Dominic in a position to maybe sort of go off on the next turn. And it's going to force Zoe to have some spell in order to bump through this Thing in the Ice. Now, note, Zoe's hands all spells. Everyone knows that.
Yep.
So likely to happen. But if she does that, that's still, she might not have the pump plus fling to kill in the next turn. So Dominic here doing a good job of sort of setting up, knowing when he can. Picked up the land for Zoe. It's a painful one, but she'll be able to cast 2 spells, which is so, so important. So we're going to
Yeah,
see
and
Monsters Despair.
I was gonna say, if you're Dominic, what happens if you take this hit, right? If you
Mhm.
if you just say no blocks because you're worried about a pump spell, are you dead to the Callous Sword?
I think you were pretty close. If she hadn't played the Swift Spear and just did like pump spell plus it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
what we're seeing here is now the Ember Heart Challenger does get a Valiant trigger because it's targeted, because Self Sword's worded like a very normal card. And so that's going to kill that thing in the ice. And I think I really like what Zoe's doing here. She saw how Dominic was willing to discard the Lotus Field, meaning, something's up, right? Like he has another one in hand or felt comfortable with the thing in the ice. She knows she can't present lethal. So she's just saying like, hey, I'm going to hedge my bets and hope to push here, knowing that, I have other things that can maybe close the door on the following turn.
Yeah, so I mean, she's dealt with all the Thing in the Ices. All three are down. Dominic at 10 life. Still Zoe's still working with a Monastery Swiss Spear. But Dominic got to untap with that artist talent, and that is a big part of. Well, we're tapping in the mana confluence. Interesting. I wonder what this means. Wonder what we are casting here. Okay, we're making some mana. We got the the island and the forest out. Things are happening now. Okay, Lotus Field,
Yup.
you're gonna sacrifice those.
It's time to say what Dominic's doing as the caster for the next 5 minutes. As we're going to see an island
Hmm.
get tapped. That's probably going to be a hidden string. We'll have to see exactly what he wants to do, and we're going to trigger sleight of hand. I'm sorry, artist talent for some looting every time. Looks like we're actually going to use the forest. That's going to trigger hidden strings. That's going to trigger artist talent. We're going to get a discard and a draw. The very powerful talent here that you're going to be seeing a lot of this weekend, as Phoenix players have adopted that in mass, and some Lotus Field players are adopting it as well. So it really lets you burn through your deck. And like you mentioned, those other modes can come in big handy with the upping of artist talent. I'm going to throw that one on screen real quick for the people at home.
Yeah, artist talent, one heck of a magic card that it really kind of changed the way that some of these Lotus Field players are building their deck. Where if you can get that thing into play, not only do all of the cantrips allow you to dig a little bit closer to your hidden strings. There's also some versions, and I don't believe. Let me take a look at Stryker's deck again. Yeah, Stryker does have the one Leer, so you can imagine if you kind of burn through a bunch of your hidden strings and cantrips, you then wish for the Leer, cast all of the spells that you cast or discarded that turn, and then the win condition for Dominic is, I believe, we're going to wish for Thassa's Oracle. That's kind of
Mm-hmm.
the main way that Dominic is winning. I've seen some versions play. I've played on MTG. I've played a couple of times against Lightning Strike, where they just like level up the talents a bunch, cast Lightning Strike, get it back with Balaged. But Dominic choosing to to not go for that, as we see a wish cast here. Presumably, if we have ways to get more mana, could maybe get a Leer here.
Yeah, could also just get 9 lives and it'd probably be game over. Just the time that would generate is so much.
Yep,
Yep.
there it is.
So 9 lives, kind of a weird achievement. Let's pull that up on screen. Sort of a cool top down, like how do you symbolize a cat having 9 lives? And basically what happens is if anything would do damage to Dom, that damage is going to be prevented, and we're going to put a life token on 9 lives. When we hit 9, we're dead, but nothing else kills us before then, and it has hexproof. And if this leaves the battlefield, Dominic would lose. So for example, Zoe had upheaval like it was cube, Dom would lose. Believe it or not, Zoe's Rakdos aggro deck does not have anything like that. So what's going to mean is Zoe's going to need to deal damage 9 times. And with Dom being at 9 life, that's just, an insane amount of life gain for him here. That's 2 down, 7 to go on Dom.
Yeah, and importantly, the 9 lives counts specifically not the amount of damage that you're taking, but just when a source would deal damage. So even if Zoe were to pump up the creatures, that's still, regardless of how big the creature is, it's still only 1 counter on the 9 lives. So it does buy Dominic quite a bit of time. Really needs to, try and sort of has the graveyard already set up, has the hidden strings and the pour over the pages. Only one Lotus Field in play. Ideally for Dom, would want to find a second one. But yeah, from here, it's just, he's got some time to set up, just needs to find the pieces to be able to assemble that kill and, churn through the deck, eventually cast the wish from the graveyard, and then wish for the Thassa's Oracle.
Yep. A big thing to note here, too, at 9 lives in this matchup is it's very good, like when you're at this low life total, but against something like Burn, like Devin mentioned, it's each instance of damage, right? So Shock would still, essentially be doing kind of a similar amount of damage, right? Like if you think about it, 9 from the 1 is very similar to 2. In this situation, though, Zoe doesn't play many burn spells. She has, these Callous Self Swords that act like flings, but she has a bunch of pump spells, and the pump spells just do nothing against Zoe. I'm sorry, against Dominic here with the 9 lives. So Zoe has a lot of essentially just dead draws in her deck. And that's why you see players play this, as the Rakdos aggro deck is the premium aggro deck in the format.
Yeah, so yeah, from here, Zoe really just wants to keep applying like more haste creatures. Ideally, would be her best, bet at this point to get more counters off that 9 lives. But at 4, got a little bit of ways to go. Maybe it looks like deploying potentially. Okay, I thought I was going to say we're playing a mouse here, but we'll see exactly what Dominic has in the tank here. Dominic thinking about if he wants to respond to the Thoughtseize, maybe something like a
Mm-hmm.
bounce spell, perhaps.
Yeah, it looks like it's just hidden strings. Looks like maybe we're just confirming life totals there. There's a lot of pain lands on Zoe's side, so it's very easy to be like, I'm at 11. I thought you were at 12. Oh, I missed that spell. My bad. We've all been there. Emberheart Challenger comes down. So currently, next turn, we can get to 7 on the lives. And if we have double Self Sword, that would be 9. But, Dominic had a little bit of time to set up, but that time window is closing. We could also just, like you mentioned, Devin, draw some Swift Spears. Game's over.
Yeah, Dominic can, buy some time with the 9 lives, but if he doesn't have anything left over, then, it's not really going to do a ton. Can't get a quite good look at Zoe's hand. I think I saw a Monstrous Rage. That one's not going to do too much against the 9 lives, but yeah, we're going to go up to 7 here, and, Dom has only got 2 lives left.
Yeah, it looks like she had a Slickshot show off that she's deciding to instead put aside for now to dodge Anger of the Gods. Could have put Dominic dead, but now if Dominic draws Anger, which she did, Zoe's not out of it yet. And if she draws land, she can Hazoret and attack. So this plotted Slickshot show off is huge. You see Dom tanking. He's figuring out what he needs to do. Of note, Artist Talent also reduces the cost of instant sorcery because we are on Talent 2. So this Anger of the Gods only 2 mana, which might factor into things when you count the fact that we're going to get to Rummage from the talent. So much here. Zoe, very heads up play, knowing these decks play sweepers. That was her biggest way to lose.
Oh. Yeah, not exactly sure what Dom drew the turn prior. I know you said he drew an Anchor this turn. Might have just been a brick, but yeah, can maybe, loot away into potentially looking for a Leer, right? Because the Lotus Field produces 3. The Anger costs 2, so you have 1 floating. I guess you still don't have the extra mana left over to strings, even if you do find the Leer. So Dom would still probably not be able to kill this turn.
I think,
but
oh yeah, it looks like there's Anger. It's really interesting that Dom played the Botanical Sanctum last turn. With the Artist Talent, I would imagine you want to hold some lands. So it's possible that Dominic just drew a land and was like, oh, maybe I don't need this mana.
The Monstrous Rage can save the Swiss Spear.
Yeah, and that's massive. And then the Heartfire Hero does 1 damage. Oh, sorry, it will die.
No, because it gets X
out. Yeah.
But the Swiss Spear plus the Slick Shot is the last 2 lives for Dominic.
Yeah. And so all Zoe needs to do here. Okay, so now Zoe is saying lethal is face up to you. Now, there's an Artist Talent. I don't know if Dominic has declined the trigger already because
what is that?
You may, right?
Chilling. I wonder if that's to represent the Artist Talent trigger.
I think it is.
Okay. I was a little confused by that for a second, Mason.
It's some Lorcana thing, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I could also just be like Storm Count. Maybe he keeps track of Lorcana cards. I'm not a Disney head. I don't know. All right. We're going to see an
Spear is going to survive. And yeah, like we mentioned, the Swift Spear plus the Slick Shot, those are the last 2 lives for Dominic. Now, from here, is there anything Dominic can find to get him out of this? We mentioned has 1 mana floating with the other 4 mana available, can play a Leer, but then would have to be tapped out for that. I guess the Leer could block the Slick Shot or the Swift Spear for a turn to get you, past that 1 last life.
Yeah, you could have an Odawara here to unsummon.
Yep.
That would be a line. We know we have Flood Caller's Valley or whatever it's called. Into the Flood.
Hazoret.
Yeah, and now that's the 3rd attacker. That's lethal. We saw this Hazoret kind of be a begrudging keep before, and Dominic's going to extend the hand. Zoe Riederman moves on to 2-0, trying to lock up her spot in the Invitational at the end of the year. She has played so many of our events. She is a grinder. You see her here in the NRG series. You see her at the RCs. She's competing in Magic so much, and she wants to go back. And, missed last year just barely. This year, she does not want to miss. We can't wait to see how her event goes for the rest of the weekend here. But, Devin, time for a backup match. We have a bit of a spicy one.
Oh yeah, so we saw Andrew Wolfius. I saw the deck list for this, and we had to feature this on camera at some point. For people who have not been playing Pioneer recently, you may not be familiar with this Dimir Ninjas deck. As we see, looks like didn't quite get a good look. It looked like Andrew maybe won that game, but Dimir Ninjas. If we can get a look at the deck list, this deck is really sweet. I believe it was kind of made popular by Nassif. I think Nassif picked it up. There were some people who kind of played it before him, and he kind of championed it a little bit. But specifically with the printing from Duskmourn, this new Kaido Bane of Nightmares, this card really changed the landscape on decks like this, because that is a very, very good payoff for playing a bunch of these cheap creatures. It's, if you can ninjutsu that thing out on turn 3, it's a lot of value, and it's even against the aggressive decks. You tap down some stuff. It just does a lot to the battlefield.
Yep. Well, let's check out these sideboards real quick as these players are sideboarding. I think Andrew might have lost because there was a Restless Anchorage sideways with Andrew at 2, and I saw a March get cast. We'll figure that out, though, when the round starts. But let's pull up this deck list here for Dimir Ninjas. We have 4 Unlicensed Hurts, 3 Anoint with Affliction, 3 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Cut Down, 2 Spell Pierce, and 1 Aclazotz, the Deepest Betrayal. Devin, what do you like here and why?
So Andrew is up against Azorius Control, so definitely wants to go towards the counter spells, Spell Pierce and Disdainful Stroke. Sometimes you could consider going towards Aclazotz. It is a little bit more awkward against Azorius because they have stuff like March and Emperor to exile it. But if you have enough cards to cut, like the Fatal Pushes are probably going to go, maybe there's something else that you want to cut to make room for that Aclazotz, but certainly the Pierces and the Strokes, and then, get these stinky pushes out of here. I just want to note, Andrew's sporting 4 copies of Ornithopter. Love to see it.
Mm-hmm. And 4 copies of Fairy Miscreant. We'll get into that one when the game starts.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
one of my favorite cards in this deck. But let's check out the blue-white control side. No favorites here, as Evan has brought 2 Aether Gust, 2 Bez of the Bounding Spring, 2 Dovin's Veto, 2 Rest in Peace, a High Noon, a Hullbreaker, a Mystical Dispute, a Shark Typhoon, a Stonheim's Unleashed. Going to make some angels there. 1 Temporary Lockdown, and 1 Chrome Host Seed Shark. Devin, what do you like here and why?
I gotta read Stonheim Unleashed real quick. Just let me pull this card up.
It's like Entreat the Angels, but it's
the Foretell. Okay,
one.
The Foretold Entreat the Angels. Okay, so Andrew playing against ninjas presumably wants to have ways to remove the cheap creatures. So I mean, looking at the sideboard, not a ton of ways to do that, right? There's the 1 Temporary Lockdown, which presumably is going to come in because it kills the Miscreants, the Flood Pit Drowners, all that kind of stuff. With regards to anything else, I mean, maybe the Chrome Host Seed Shark could be okay. Beza's not super great because a lot of Andrew's creatures do have flying, so Beza does, the bodies don't matter too much. Mystical Dispute's pretty good. Andrew has a lot of blue cards, but other than the Lockdown, the Dispute, and maybe the Seed Shark, I'm not really seeing a ton here for Evan.
Yeah, and I don't know if Evan needs a ton either. Andrew's deck has some elements that are very frustrating and hard to answer, but those are few and far between, and we're playing a lot of supporting cards like Fairy Miscreant, like Ornithopter that we talked about, that if you're able to pick apart a little bit, like these control decks do well, they're not going to really amount to much, right? So this is a very interesting spot where the games can be very, back and forth, but sometimes Evan's just going to have sort of the right cards at the right time-ish. And let's cut down to our feature match area. It looks like our players are shuffling up and dealing their hands here. It looks like Evan maybe is mulliganing, maybe was taking a little bit longer to sideboard shuffle there, but Andrew has decided to keep, it seems, and does look to be on the play here for game number 2, meaning we lost game number 1.
Yeah, and we just wanted to highlight this Ninjas deck because this deck is so cool. I've played a little bit with it, and specifically, just as I was talking about earlier, Kaido Bane of Nightmares. If we can get that one up on the screen, just does so much. You're playing things like Ornithopter and Fairy Miscreant, which in general are just incredibly weak cards, just so you can enable a turn 3 Ninjutsu Kaido more often because the card is that powerful. It just, able to lock down a creature for a turn. The turn that you hit with the Kaido, you get to draw a card off of the 0. The emblem is pretty relevant, especially in this deck, sporting 4 copies of Mutavault, where normally you don't have a lot of ninjas, but there are 4 Mutavaults and the 4 Moon Circuit Hackers. So plenty of ways to kind of go wide with the emblem. Just a fantastic card, and one that, we see, there's the turn 2 Moon Circuit Hacker. That's going to get a free card for Andrew.
Yeah, using Mockingbird or something that can copy the ninjas. And I was going to say, this is the other reason to have cards like Ornithopter. Moon Circuit Hacker is such a well-designed, awesome magic card. He has ninjutsu for 1, and when it deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card, unless it entered the battlefield this turn. So on the turn it enters, and sort of the first time it hits, you just get the card for free. It's so sick. And I know if you're at home and you're a little skeptical, this might just look like, oh, we're featuring kind of the meme deck, right? And this deck hasn't proven itself at the top tiers yet, but I think there's a lot going for it, Devin. Cheap creatures with some of the best cards in the format when it comes to interaction, like Thoughtseize Fatal Push, we've seen decks like this succeed. And even though this one looks a little memey having names like ninjas, as we're going to see another Moon Circuit hacker, whatcha, believe it, coming on in here. It does have a lot of just powerful game like this, right? And so you do have to play some cards like Fairy Miscreant and Ornithopter in order to help enable these things all the time. But we might even see as time goes on that those cards might go down. Now, I think Fairy Miscreant might always stay, as it just draws a card for every Miscreant you have in play. So with these Ninjutsus, it's so strong. We've been using Mockingbird, but imagine it was a Miscreant. We played another one. Things could be going crazy here. We're going to discard that Mockingbird from Andrew here to the second one does loot. And now Andrew gets to play that tempo game that we've seen blue-black decks do in all the other formats, and something that the players aren't accustomed to playing against here in Pioneer. We're going to see how Evan does. Evan's finally on turn 3, meaning he gets to play his game as he has a handful of Wandering Emperor, Starnheim Unleash interaction.
What I found pretty interesting about last turn, and I think why this Ninjas deck is so cool, is Evan had the turn 2 normalize, right? Mm-hmm. Evan had the ways, so normally you're playing blue-white control, you say, okay, whatever you spell you play on turn 2, I'm just going to counter, but Andrew didn't even play a spell. That's why these ninjutsu cards are so powerful. And you can imagine if Andrew follows that up with a Kaido this turn, say attack with all 3, and what is Evan going to do if there's a Kaido? You can't normalize the ninjutsu. So just a ton of ways to play through blue-white control. You were mentioning the Fairy Miscreants. I know that we kind of made a little fun of the Ornithopters. I have seen some versions of this Ninjas deck removing the Ornithopters for Spyglass Sirens to get a maybe a bit of a higher card quality. I know Nassif has been doing some work on this deck, and I think that's what he was doing. But interesting to see how that comes moving forward. No Kaido here for Andrew. That is definitely the card he wanted the most.
Yep. And we're going to see a Mutavault, though, which is an amazing card versus the Supreme Verdict decks here. And we're going to see a March for the Lily Light get to the Moon Circuit hacker here, excuse me. And now we're in Wandering Emperor territory. Of note, we do not have the 5th land for our Teferian hand, but I think we have a Memory Deluge as well. So we have, Andrew, what we like to call the squeeze when it comes to blue-white control. We got Deluge, we got Emperor. What are you going to do?
Yeah, you play into one, that you play into the Emperor. All right, I'll cast the Emperor. You don't play into the Emperor, well, then we'll just Deluge. I think I may have spotted some Angels in Evan's hand. I think that is the Starnheim Unleashed, that kind of full art, weird promo version. And we see a Disdainful Stroke on the Emperor. That's a pretty good turn here. Pretty good setup for Andrew. See, Evan falling down to 8, still has the Mutavault available. So even if Andrew's board gets swept, at least has something left over with the Mutavault. But notably for Andrew, still no Kaido. Now, there is one interesting thing, couple that I wanted to point out with regards to Moon Circuit Hacker.
The old Kaido, though.
The other Kaido, okay.
No, OG Kaido, this is one of my favorite Planeswalkers of all time. This one comes in, it faces down the next turn, so we won't be able to interact with it even if we could. But basically, you draw a card if you attack this turn. If you don't, you loot, so draw then discard. But it also makes ninjas and gets an emblem that basically pulls creatures from the deck. Don't worry about the emblem. What's probably going to happen is this is just going to draw cards every turn for Andrew here. And you're seeing Evan sort of in the squeeze here, can main phase this Emperor in order to play around cards like Disdainful Stroke, but is just going to be having some real issues with Mutavault on play. And if we draw that Kaito plus a land, we're going to be able to make an emblem and attack and put some real power on the board.
Yeah, the other Kaido is, I think, just, not quite lethal, right? Because there would be 5 with Evan at 6, because the Mutavault would be 3. The Flood Pit Surrender doesn't get pumped. What I was going to mention last turn, which is there's something that sometimes comes up with this Ninjas deck, where when you're drawing cards in combat with Moon Circuit Hacker, you can actually still ninjutsu in end of combat. So sometimes what happens is if you say, attack with Moon Circuit Hacker, you draw the Kaido off of the hacker, you can still ninjutsu in end of combat because it is still considered an unblocked attacker.
Yep. And Aclazot's the deepest betrayal here for Andrew. He decided to bring it in. It's a card that can get stuck in hand sometimes, and due to the counter spells, but when you have so much looting like Andrew's deck does, you just don't care. And here's Aclazot's coming down. That is a unstoppable threat here. Even if we Supreme Verdicted, it's going to come back. And we're seeing Andrew also have these Mutavaults that are causing real issues. This Flood Pit Drowner can't get, Wandering Emperor because it has Vigilance. So Andrew really putting some hurt here on Evan. Also, Evan has to be so careful playing against this deck, right? If you say no blocks, do you have anything before damage, for example, then, he says nothing. You're like, okay, I'm going to Emperor. Well, then he can ninjutsu, right? So you have to be very, heads up about it. So we're going to see Starnheim Unleashed just cast, get me an Angel, 4/4 on the board. It's going to block Aclazot's.
think we're just dead on board, though, right? It's 6 life. You block the Ecclesots,
I think
animate 2
so.
Mutavaults. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We also just have this Brazen Borrower. Let them know. Just say, I got you. So Andrew cleans up there and really shows why this Demir's Ninja deck has some game to it, especially against decks like Azura's Control, like you mentioned. Being able to ninjutsu our cards underneath it's super awesome. And Devin, I think this deck would get so much more play if we just told people, hey, Nassif's been playing this like blue-black tempo deck. Like, I think you should try it. And then you handed it to them and they shuffled up and they drew all these ninjas and you're like, don't worry about it. Trust.
Don't worry about it. It's fine. Yeah.
Ninjas,
we just have
better
to label
for marketing, bad for picking up.
Right.
But Andrew here showing it is a real deck. And
if you told people it was just blue-black Delver, they'd be into it, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, so it'd be into it, and some people would go, ugh,
Yeah.
And speaking of going, ugh, it's hard to believe, Devin, but the year is over, basically, especially for us here on the NRG series. This is our last event before Invitational, which you can watch here on Twitch, December 13th to the 14th. But we have next year's events coming up. And while these players are shuffling, let's show off next year here really quickly. Throw the slide up just so people at home can see it because they are presenting already. February 1st and 2nd, that's our first event to start off next year's series. If you want to be battling for the $30,000 Invitational, which also is a PTQ, Devin, to get you straight there, come out, play our events. We have a leaderboard. We love to reward consistent play and success. We had a lot of players who've done that. We had players like Dykeman, a good friend of Andrew's here. Last year did it, made it to the Pro Tour. An amazing player. That could be you. Come on out. Here are the events for next year. We'll be showing these off more along with the formats with them very, very soon. Let's get back to the feature match area. As it looks like they are mulliganing.
Yeah, and that game too was just kind of a perfect example of the Dimir Ninjas deck just firing at all cylinders. Andrew had the one drop into the Moon Circuit Hacker. The turn, Evan left up No More Lies the one turn. Andrew had another ninja to punish. Evan really wasn't ever able to convert that No More Lies because not only do you have the ninjas, you also have flash threats. So even if you're not spending your mana on a ninja, you can just say, well, I'll hold up a Flood Pit Drowner, not play into your No More Lies. So Andrew has a ton of game against the blue-white control deck, along with all of these creature lands, right? Mutavault, Hall of Storm Giants, and the Mutavault's also getting pumped by the Kaido emblem. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think I spotted a Thoughtseize in Andrew's hand, so we can get a good glimpse of what Evan is working with. No, never mind. We're going to start with the Miscreant.
I like this. Get the Miscreant down, and then next turn you have like another one. You just go Thoughtseize in the Miscreant, and your opponents need to have like 2 counter spells, or they might just counter the Thoughtseize, right? Evan doesn't know what's going on here. And yeah, Evan's going to take one. No Moon Circuit Hacker this time, it seems. Or if we do, we don't want to fire it off.
Yeah, potentially wanting to fire off the Thoughtseize post-combat. This will almost certainly trade for a counter spell. Yeah, you almost certainly want to, especially because, you're not even sure that your counter spells are going to be live next turn if Andrew just goes for a Kaido. Second Thoughtseize.
Had it. As we're going to look at the hand here now, we're going to have Memory Deluge 3 steps ahead, Get Lost, and No More Lies. Only one card that really doesn't just answer things here, but sometimes you do want to take the answers. Devin, what are you thinking here? It looks like he's going with Memory Deluge.
Yeah, it really depends on what Andrew's next threat is, because if it's a Kaido Bane of Nightmares, he would probably just take the Get Lost, since you don't really care about either Counterspell, and Get Lost is the only card that can interact with that card on Evan's turn. So by taking Deluge, it kind of signifies to me that Andrew doesn't have a Kaido that he wants to play next turn, and maybe expects this game to go a little bit longer.
Yep. Andrew does have a Disdainful Stroke in hand. So it does look like he's maybe saying like, hey, Azura's Control only has a few cards that really matter. Everything else is really redundant. I'm going to fight over those few cards that matter and maybe play a longer game that I would normally like to. And Evan, taking an aggressive posture here with 3 steps ahead, knows that he needs to get something going or he's going to just lose to this tempo deck. I love this here, as it looks like we're 3-stepping and maybe figuring out what exactly we want to discard.
Is that the Starnheim again? I think it might be.
Yeah. I think we drew Starnheim 3 steps ahead and Wandering Emperor as our 3 draw steps since we saw the Thoughtseize. We're going to discard the Starnheim Unleashed.
Time. Mason, no angels.
Yeah. Well, that's the good part about putting that card in your deck is it makes looting very easy. As we're going to pass the turn back and we play the Restless Anchorage.
Why you got to be like that? Just pass the turn. I'll play some angels, man.
Drowner of the Pit coming down. Evan knows Andrew's hand is full of spells, but doesn't want to fight over this one, even though it's a kind of frustrating threat. Your Wandering Emperor can't answer it. Wants to keep up mana, doesn't maybe want to get something like Thoughtseize, doesn't want to get Kaito'd again. Andrew's deck really showing what blue-black flash can be like. Watching this deck play, Devin, I can't help but think if we just had less Ornithopters and more real cards, we
Like
would have
Spyglass Iron?
I was just thinking like go for the throat as like 2 of them. Like you could even just have some Thopters, just some cards that interact. But we're seeing it here just because I'm thinking about how the flash gate, like this, like holding up things playing out. It's pretty powerful, but we'll have to see how this deck develops and how Andrew wants to develop this game here. Enough big picture talk as Evan's making the land drops, which is bad news for Andrew. He does not want Evan to be on 5 mana. That is when everything is playable. And we're just going to get in for 3. Evan's going to take it down to 12.
Yeah, Andrew's still on 2 lands here, unable to, to develop his mana a little bit, probably stuck on some 3s in hand. Maybe did have, I was going to say maybe had a Kaido, but if he had a Kaido, maybe would have gone for it this turn. So potentially could.
It's a fairy miscreant.
I was just going to say, I was going to ask you why this is good, but miscreant, yeah, this is where it's at right here.
Draw a card. You're dead. How do you win?
There is nothing. I don't know if you agree or disagree with the statement, Mason, but there's nothing better at Magic than drawing a card. So
very few things. Very few things. I'm also a big fan of drawing a card. Big fan of cantripping. If I've got a fiddle, I don't want it. Just give me the card. Give me the dopamine. As we're going to see a disdainful stroke on the Emperor here.
Funny enough, Evan could have actually gone for Emperor the Fairy Miscreant in response to the Mockingbird, but chose not to. And to be fair, Andrew hit the disdainful stroke anyways, so it was kind of a moot point. But interesting, that Evan chose that, decided not that he didn't want to go for that.
Also, Evan has Supreme Verdict here. Feels like this battlefield isn't worth verdicting. And, if Evan might get Kaito'd here because of it, and that would be very powerful, Andrew. We're going to see what Andrew exactly wants to do, but Evan just trying to play a bit of a longer game, wants to hold up 3 steps ahead in these other counter spells. I think really worried about Kaito, the OG from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty.
Evan's got this Anchorage that we could fire up, and Anchorage does, I think we're going for it. Now, I think last game, I saw Andrew discard a Fatal Push to one of the Moon Circuit hackers, and I believe Andrew kept those in specifically for the Anchorage. It looks like no Fatal Push this time, but we do have a Flood Pit Stranded to tap that down for a turn. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the stun counter, even if it's not a creature, it still won't untap, correct?
I think that is how it works. I think stun counters just say your thing does, like it removes the counter instead of untapping. It's like a replacement effect. So not only does this block, essentially get the blocker out of the way, but it also just strands us on the mana. So if we draw something like Teferi 5, we can't slam it with the shields down. A great play here from Andrew. You see Evan decide to not use any removal spell. That's because we do have the Supreme Verdict in hand. And I imagine, that's what we're going to see here. As Andrew's board is going to get cleaned up. That card can't be countered, sort of the bane of tempo decks always. And Andrew doesn't have a follow-up play end of turn, but does he have something like Kaito here that can come down? It's the OG Kaito Shizuki. We're going to make a ninja and then phase out Devin. So
three mana Kaito's not too bad on this board. Can make a creature this turn. Next turn, use the creature to get another card off Kaito. Evan with like you said, the Teferi and the 3 steps ahead, kind of just chilling over there. Maybe this is a good turn for Evan to slam Teferi. Although Andrew, as we mentioned, did have 2 Spell Pierces in the board. Let's see if no, Teferi. I thought there was a Teferi.
No, I was saying if he drew a Teferi, like some of his best draws are turned off thanks to the Flood Pit. Now, Evan can upkeep, get lost this Kaito if he wants to prevent it. He can also do it now, in response to the attack. Yep.
Yeah, it's a play here for Evan, so we can't draw a card post combat. Now,
also dodge the damage on the maps. So
do we have the other Kaito? Is the question. Looks like no. Yeah, Andrew really just, unable to find that the Kaito Bane of Nightmares. That is,
there it is.
that it's hard to tell sometimes, but that is the new Kaito. That is the Bane of Nightmares on top here for Andrew. So now it's face up. Now Evan knows about it. Andrew's certainly going to want to keep that one. And then, we're making some more ninjas.
I actually love this play from Andrew. Andrew knows there's still a counterspell left in hand, right? From Evan. He also knows there's probably not a normal kill spell. He probably would have done it in response there because this unblockable threat's pretty big. So it's all counters in hand for Evan. We just drew a Beza. That's pretty big. And you see he's even discarding the No More Lies because he knows that card is just not effective right now. And Andrew has a Drowner of Pits in hand too. This Beza is going to come down.
Oh, Mason, that's a huge draw step because we can Field of Ruin to force Andrew to shuffle away the Kaito.
That's huge. It looks all right. We're not going to go for that. We're not going to go for the Beza. We're
Interesting.
equal on cards in hand. We're behind on the battlefield, though, so it's time for some fish. And we are going to get 4 life. Um,
Wow. That is
Looks like
very
Evan's
surprising.
valuing the counter spell over this. A little interesting, given, like you said, the Kaito could also just be a moment. Sometimes you get in the rhythm, right? You're playing, you miss with the small interactions like that. We're going to have to see how it plays out here as the beautiful fish token hits the battlefield. Top 5 art of the year, I said it. And I'm going to pass back to
Yeah,
Andrew.
the base is kind of interesting against the Kaido because basically you go 3 mana, Kaido pick up the Mockingbird, maybe you leave back the 2/2, and then the Kaido stuns the Beza. You can then redeploy the Mockingbird to copy, and then you have the 2/2 to check the 1/1s. But also with Evan at 11, you could also just get in 6 damage here. Ooh, and we have the Drowner. But that's gonna get counterspelled. So you could go, attack with both creatures, pick up the Mockingbird, put in the Kaido, hit for it's 5. So 5 damage, put Evan to 6. Then you can go -2, stun the Beza, Mockingbird copy, trade for a 1/1. The other 1/1 would be able to attack the Kaido. Oh, there's also the anchorage, though. That's the other issue. The anchorage can maybe take out the Kaido next turn.
Yeah, and the Hall of the Storm Giants if you want to have a little bit more mana commitment to it. So this is pretty big here. I think the line, honestly, Devin, is Emblem. You
Okay.
emblem here and you have the unblockable ninjas and you just pray.
So you
Because
go hit for 5, put Evan to 6, emblem, copy the ninja, and then next turn, well, yeah, if you hit a spell off the map, that's 6, right?
yeah, exactly. You have lethal set up, and it also is the thing that plays through removal the most. Now Evan has to draw a wrath, not just a kill spell. So
Mhm.
something like Get Lost or the Wandering Emperor becomes a little less impactful. Looks like Andrew's going to use the Beza, though, maybe in hopes to set something else up here. I also wonder if Evan feels like he can handle the Kaito, was going to just take the one hit, and now has that Field of Ruin set up for a Mutavault later, which could have been a huge problem. So Evan maybe thinking 3 steps ahead here, but let's see exactly what we're going to do, as Evan cannot block these ninjas per their text.
Yeah, so if you're Evan, you probably want to fire up at least the anchorage to make sure you can clear the Kaido. So the anchorage fires up. Maybe you then post combat use the map to do a little bit of fixing on one of the fish. But then, yeah, with Evan at 6, Andrew does have 3 power unblockable in the air. So does have a 2-turn clock. And oh, the Mockingbird has flying, right? The Mockingbird can
Yeah.
chump block the anchorage. I forgot about that. Okay.
Yeah, and doing that here so we don't. And March for the Light on top of the deck.
I want to keep that one.
Massive play here.
Definitely want to keep that one here if you're Evan. But yeah, now if you go emblem, hit for 3, leave back. No, well, you wouldn't leave back the Kaido. You hit with both. One of the fish chump blocks the Kaido, but then the Kaido gets attacked, and then the March takes care of the ninja, and then you're kind of on empty.
Yeah, I wonder if this is just you have to pop the map on the ninja just to get across damage now and hope like you either hit Mutavault or like a spell that matters. Or maybe honestly like removing a spell that doesn't matter, right? Like one of those
Mhm.
cards that we have that isn't very good. I do kind of wish we did this before we emblemed, just because we could potentially have drawn the card, but I doubt there are many cards that matter. Andrew has a
Yeah,
Mockingbird Spell
probably.
Pierce in hand.
There's a hacker on top. I can't imagine you want that. I think really the card that
Well,
I think Andrew needs to find is another copy of Kaido, right?
Well, I think Hacker is actually really good because Andrew
Is
has
it?
Mockingbird. That's going to copy the unblockable ninja. Now, the
Okay.
March of the Lily Light, you can sort of sneak through that extra damage.
Oh, right, because the March can only take care of one creature. So this is going to put Evan down to 3. Evan draws the March. Next, yeah, you replay the Mockingbird, copy the unblockable. You can only march 1, but then
Mhm.
the other one is unblockable. But do we have a counter spell for this, maybe? I can't quite get a good look at the last card in Evan's hand.
Well, if he does, Andrew had that Spell Pierce, which is probably its last turn of being live.
True.
Evan, untapping here, last stun kind of removed from the Beza. Going to pick up the March. So,
And notably, Evan still has that Field of Ruins. So, could force Andrew to shuffle away that hacker. Because yeah, as you mentioned, as of right now, with what is face up on the battlefield, Evan is facing lethal, can only remove one of the creatures, and the the unblockable unblocked creatures. Say that 10 times fast. Yeah, Evan's just gonna pack it up. Okay.
Yeah, and so the ninja really plays on things like Wandering Emperor chat. You know what I mean? Like it allows you to push through a little bit more if there's some life game there. Great play and really showing off why this Demir's ninja deck can be so strong. We did not have a very good start, right? Like we kind of just didn't do very much. We kind of just thought seized away from Evan. But we're gonna cut back here to the booth as we're gonna have an interview with Andrew here in just a second. It just shows just how powerful this Demir mid-rangey, flashy deck can be, especially when it hits its good matchups. And I think that's kind of a big sign, right? Like, in one way, you could argue, well, obviously, if it plays its good matchup, it should do well. But if it's playing its good matchups and struggling in the games where it's not functioning super well, right? Like we kind of saw in that game, that's a pretty big sign to stay away from the deck, right? It's like, hey, I'm supposed to beat this deck. I kind of had a bad start and I wasn't really in it. That showed just how powerful some of these cards line up. And now, if you can get your bad matchups to be kind of reasonable, then suddenly you have the position. I'm sure your deck has a chance to be a well-positioned deck on a weekend. And I think there's a lot of leg to this deck, and I'm really excited to see how players like Nassif push this archetype forward in the coming weeks. As Pioneer kind of lost the limelight, but there are still a lot of people playing it. There's still Magic Online challenges, right? And there are going to be stuff like us and other people that do Pioneer events from time to time. So it's going to be really interesting to see the deck's evolution.
Right. And one interesting thing about that game in particular was how well the ninjas lined up against counter spells. Right. Normally, counterspell, as we talked about, counterspell is very good against the turn 2 plays from the creature deck because they're usually tapping out on their own turn. But not only can your plays not be countered because they're ninjutsu, you can even say turn 3 is what we saw Andrew do that game, ninjutsu plus hold up a flash creature. And you're really taxing those counter spells and putting your opponent in an awkward position where they have to tap mana when they don't really want to, and then you get to untap and resolve another threat. Or if they don't cast the counter spell in the situation, then maybe you have another ninjutsu card next turn, and they're just never going to get value out of their counter spells.
Yep. And back-to-back rounds there, Devin, we saw just how good Mockingbird is out of these cheap blue aggressive decks, right? In that game, just the fact that it was a 1/1 unblockable because of the Kaito token was massive. And it might not seem like that big a deal, right? But when you're going to play a deck a lot, things like that are going to come up. And having those small synergies with cards you already want to play is so nice and appealing. So we actually have Andrew sitting down here for the feature match post-game interview. So Andrew, congratulations on being 2-0 with the very sick Ninja stack. How do you feel after that kind of very exciting round 2?
It was pretty close. It was pretty close. Game 3, I didn't know if I was going to get there or not. I was drawing pretty poorly near the end.
Yeah, we were mentioning that your draw wasn't quite coming together, but you were still able to kind of pull it out there. Talk to me about what kind of brought you to playing this deck for this weekend.
I used to play a lot of ninjas in Legacy, so it just kind of translates over. And the new cards that are printed in Duskmoor really push that deck to be, I think, quite good right now.
Yeah. One interesting thing about the matchup in particular that we saw, especially in that game 3 where, your opponent held up Nobilize for a couple of turns and you had to punish them. You got to punish them with just, ninjutsuing at a couple of Moon Circuit hackers and holding up flash threats. So as far as the matchup is concerned, it feels like that's got to be one of the better ones for ninjas, I would guess.
It depends. It really depends on, it fluctuates. I really had, it was pretty frustrating that third game because I really wanted him to get lost. Those ninjas that were coming in, because I really need to resolve Kaito. If you really get stuck on your mana, the blue white control can really punish you pretty hard.
So what are the matchups you're not wanting to see when you bring a deck like this to the tournament? If someone's at home, they see this like, okay, I'm going to get this deck. What are they hoping not to run into?
My good friend Steven Dykman's been playing this Zur deck. I played with my buddy right before the event, and I got crushed consistently. And Enigmatic is also a really problematic matchup. Those Overlords really can take over the game very quickly.
Yeah, the last question I had for you, I'm not sure if you've seen maybe some other versions that I've seen some people cut the Ornithopters for Spyglass Sirens, and I don't know if that's something, you're sporting the 4 Ornithopters today. How do you like the Ornithopters compared to something else like that?
So the Spyglass Siren promotes more consistent gameplay, but the Ornithopter really promotes really explosive early games. And it also, in matchups like Phoenix, for instance, you can go put your Ninja into play, put your Ornithopter in hand, then just play your blocker. So you can really protect Kaito pretty consistently with Ornithopter, much easier than you could Spyglass Siren. But the maps are pretty, getting those extra incremental points of damage really are pretty good.
Yeah, we saw in that last game how much the maps matter on unblockable creatures. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this deck develops over the rest of the weekend. And we can't wait to see how your record develops as well. So go take some time before this round is over and relax. Thank you so much for joining us here in the
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Of course, anytime. And Devin, with that, that's going to do it for this round. We're pretty deep into the round time-wise from what I can tell. So we're going to take a quick break, pick our future matches for the next round, and we'll see you all back here in just a couple minutes. See you soon.